In this video, I'll be covering how to use the CFMA Financial Benchmarker survey template that is powered by Sage Office Connector. If you haven't done so already, you'll need to first download the template. To do that, go to www.event1software.com/CFMA-benchmarker. This page provides some general information about the template, including a short 3-minute video that explains what it's all about. There's also information at the bottom of the page regarding Office Connector, as well as some special instructions on how to find your Sage Office Connector license IDs. So to download the template, I'll click on the download button. And notice that the first couple of things that it asks for is the license ID of your Sage Office Connector license and your company name. So if you're not sure what your license ID is, an easy way to find that is to open up Excel, then go to the Add-ins tab, where you should see an Office Connector menu. Click Office Connector, click Help, go to Environment, and then View System Information. This will open up a report in your web browser, and at the midway down or towards the bottom of this report, we'll see information about your Office Connector licenses. So this is a good way also to confirm that you have the appropriate software. You should see Office Connector Query, either a designer or standard license, and there should be a valid license ID that's current. And you should also see that when you scroll down, you should see GL Financials listed, which means that you also own Office Connector Financials. So if you don't see a license for Office Connector Query, or you don't see the feature for Financials, then you may not have the appropriate software, and you'll need to either contact Sage or contact your Sage business partner to acquire that. So right now what I'm interested in though is the license ID, so I'm going to select that, hit Control-C to copy it, and I'll close this tab, and then back on the download form I'll paste that in, and then enter my company information, which needs to match what was on the license information, enter my contact information, click the box for the CAPTCHA prompt, and then click on download. Okay, and then on this page, my download is ready. I can click on the download button. There are also some instructions here, which we'll cover in a moment, about what to do with the file once you've downloaded it. So I'll click on the download button, and notice that at the bottom of the window that starts a download process, and I can click the arrow button and see what folder that's in. That should be in your default downloads folder. And so at this point, I'm going to copy this template file over into my Office Connector Reports folder. The easiest way to do that is to first just right-click on the file, then click on Copy. I'll minimize this window, and this window. And I'll go to Office Connector Launchpad. And notice at the bottom of this window, it shows the folder where all of my reports reside. So I'll click on that link. That opens up that folder. Now I can simply right click and click Paste. And I've now copied the template into that reports folder. So now when I close this window and go back to Office Connector Launchpad, I see that the CFMA Financial Benchmarker survey template is now listed. To begin using the template, I'll simply double click on it, and I'll click on Enable Editing. And then I'll select the Sage 300 Construction Real Estate data folder that I want to use. Enter my login credentials for Sage. And then after it refreshes a few queries, then we will be ready to begin. Okay, so the first worksheet that I'll take note of is the information worksheet. This worksheet provides some general information about the purpose of the template. It also indicates if macros are enabled. Macros must be enabled to utilize the functionality of this template. If macros are not enabled, you'll see a red indicator here that indicates that. And there is a hyperlink here to a resource in our knowledge base that explains how to enable macros for your Event One powered solutions. It also identifies the required software and the required data files. In the section about using the report, it does reference a couple of areas. One is the extract and mapping instructions, and the other is the instructions that are provided by CFMA. So I'm going to cover those briefly, but I'll leave it to you to read the details on each one of those worksheets for yourself. The instructions worksheet is what's provided by the standard CFMA survey template, and this provides instructions just simply about how to fill out the template, and it provides some blanks here to record information about your company. The extract and mapping instructions is specific to Sage Office Connector, and this provides instructions on how to use the Office Connector functionality of the template. And again, rather than covering that in detail, we're just going to step through it together during this video. Okay, so to get started, we're going to click on the Extract Parameters worksheet. And here is where we're going to tell Office Connector which set of financial values to pull from Sage 300 and how to consolidate them. The first option for the prefix selection applies to companies who have a prefix structure on their general ledger account. If your company does not use prefixes in your general ledger account format, then simply leave this set to consolidate all. If your company does use prefixes, and all of the prefixes within your data folder represent the same fiscal legal entity, then again leave this on consolidate all, and all of those prefixes will be consolidated for the reporting. If your prefix structure identifies separate individual entities, so for example, let's say prefix A identifies the company, and you have multiple companies, then you might want to use the second option to identify the specific prefix that you want to report for. And you'll notice that when I click this, I can click the drop down and select individual companies in this case, based on their prefix. This also does support the ability to use wildcards, so I can create a mask, for example. If my prefix structure, for example, had two segments, so a prefix A and a prefix B, and I wanted to say include all of company 10 and only prefix B's that begin with the number 5 and have 2 digits following, the underscore represents a wildcard character, so that would be all of the 500s, for example. If I needed to include all of the prefix B's underneath company 10, I would use a % symbol, and that again is a wildcard that represents any number of characters following that. Okay, so for our purposes, we will use just one prefix. And again, if your prefix A represents individual companies, then you may need to submit multiple surveys, one for each company, and just follow this process for each one of them. Now, if your set of prefixes in General Ledger is such that you can't use this second option easily and you really need to combine specific prefixes together in order to report the individual entities that need to be reported, then you can use this third option where we can create a list of prefixes that will be combined. And if I click on the prefix list link, that takes me to the prefix list worksheet. And here I would simply identify the name of a list. That can be any arbitrary name that you want to make up. List A as the default. And then on each row in this table, you would identify the specific prefixes that make up that list. And to add more rows, simply tab across, and more rows will be inserted automatically as you tab from one row to the next. You can create as many lists as you want simply by adding more rows with a different name in the list column, and then use those lists back on the Extract Parameters worksheet. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to just use the second option to query all of the financial data for company 10. Going over to the period and method selections. The first option is the period type, and we're going to leave that set to fiscal for the CFMA survey. The other option is calendar. So if your company's fiscal year ends in December, then there will be no difference between the two. If your company's fiscal year does not end in December, then Office Connector Financials does allow you to still report on a calendar year basis if you so choose. That's not applicable in this case for the survey, so we'll leave that set to fiscal. The next option is to identify the fiscal year, and that will be the 4-digit year of the month in which your last fiscal year ended. So obviously if we're reporting for fiscal year 2018 and your year ends in December, you would enter 2018 here. But if your fiscal year ended, say, in January, and so your last fiscal year completed was ending January 31st of 2019, then we'd enter 2019 in that field. In this case, I'm using the sample data, and I don't have more current information than 2015, so I'll use that year. And then for the fiscal period, that's always going to be 12 unless your company does use 13-period accounting. So again, if we were using a company that had a fiscal year that ends in January, we would still enter 12, not 1. 12 representing the last period of the fiscal year. The last option then is the accounting method. That can be either accrual or cash. That must be the accounting method that is set up in General Ledger. So in order to report on a cash basis, for example, your General Ledger would have been set up to track financial values on a cash basis. So you would select the appropriate option here based on how your General Ledger is set up. Okay, so once all of those options have been selected, I'll click on Query Data. And at this point, Office Connector Financials is querying the General Ledger account balances, performing its consolidations and rollbacks and whatnot in order to come up with the balances as of the end of the fiscal year that you specified for the set of prefixes that you identified. Okay, so once that process finishes, I'm taken to the extracted data and mapping worksheet, and here I see a list of all of my account numbers and their titles and their balances as of the fiscal year that I specified. And again, this is the balance that's consolidated for the prefixes that I identified as well. So these balances are what's going to be used to populate the financial information values over on this worksheet. Now notice that on the survey worksheet, there of course are no account numbers because those are specific to your company. Instead, there are account categories and captions listed here that identify each one of the different inputs. So the key at this point is to map these various account categories and captions to your chart of accounts. So to do that, we'll go to the mapping worksheet. We'll go to the account category column and click the drop down. And the list of items that we see here relate back to those captions that we just saw on the financial information survey worksheet. So as an example, I would select cash and cash equivalents for the first couple, and then just simply continue down the list and map each one of the accounts to the appropriate input value on the survey worksheet. Okay, once I have that mapping process completed, the indicator at the top here turns blue, indicating that I've mapped all of my account numbers. And at this point, I would want to go ahead and save this mapping so that I can reuse this in the future. To do that, I click on the Save Configuration button, and that indicates that it's now saved my mappings in a particular file located within my Sage 300 data folder. And at a future date, I'm using this template again for, say, another entity, or using it again next year. I simply have to click on the Load Configuration button in order to pull this mapping back into this worksheet. So again, this should be a one-time process, assuming that all of your different entities use the same chart of accounts, and your chart of accounts isn't changing greatly from year to year. This would be a one-time type of configuration that you would do to map your accounts. And then going forward, it's simply a matter of specifying your fiscal year and your prefixes and whatnot, and clicking the query button to populate the values. Okay, so you'll notice that now if I go to the financial information worksheet, that I'll see each one of my inputs is now populated with the amounts from the extracted data and mapping worksheet. Okay, so one question that you could have is that if we have a particular account in Sage 300 that relates to multiple inputs, how we would handle that. So as an example, let's say that you have just one account that represents your direct construction costs. whereas on the survey template, that's broken out by individual cost type. So the way to handle that scenario, since the template cannot logically figure out for you how to divide that up, the way to handle that would be to map your single account to one of the inputs. So for example, you would map direct construction costs to direct labor, for example. Before you submit the template, then you would need to manually go back and reallocate that out to the appropriate inputs on the survey worksheet. That may require you to run other reports in order to break that out or to do an estimate of what the breakdown would be. Okay, so to finish this up, we now need to make sure that we've completed all of the other inputs on the survey. So we'll go back to the instructions worksheet, make sure that you've entered all of your company information here. Likewise, on the general profile worksheet, make sure you've answered all the questions here as well. And then finally, on the financial information worksheet, which is largely filled out for you now, again, just make sure that everything has been completed and looks accurate. The fields that are identified with the green shading are those fields that are coming from your Sage 300 data via Office Connector. The other fields would be fields you may still have to enter a value for. So once we have completed this process and all of the data is there, the final step would be to make sure that we save a copy of this. So I'm going to click on File, Save As, and we'll give it some name. So we'll call this, for example, 2018 CFMA Survey for Company 10. And save that as a macro-enabled workbook. We'll click Save. Now this workbook, as it is right now, is linked to your Sage 300 data, and it does have Office Connector queries and functions embedded in it. So the workbook as it is right now can't be submitted to CFMA. Instead, what we have to do is click on the Extract Parameters worksheet, click on the Save as Values button, and what this will do is it will save a copy of the workbook with all of the Office Connector queries and functions converted to static values. And notice that the default name is the same file name I specified earlier, but with the word values appended to the end of it. And so I'll click on Save. And notice that all of the Office Connector related tabs have now disappeared, and I'm left with only the tabs that make up the ordinary CFMA survey that's in the Excel format. And this is not much different than an ordinary Excel file at this point because, again, it no longer has any direct links back to your data and no links to Office Connector. So at this point, I can close out of this. So at this point, I'm ready to upload the workbook. Okay, so on the CFMA Benchmarker site, I'll enter my login credentials. Click on the questionnaire page. Click on the offline survey page. And then scroll down to the box that says Upload Completed Survey Forms. Click the Browse button. Select the values copy of the workbook. And then click on Upload File. Now, if later you determine that there was some incorrect information and you need to correct your survey form, you can re-upload the same file. Just keep the file name the same, and the file that you previously uploaded will be replaced by the new file that you upload. If you are submitting surveys for multiple company entities, that's fine. Just make sure that each file is uniquely named. And that completes the process of using the CFMA Financial Benchmarker Survey template that's powered by Office Connector.